Steam rose from the morning mess hall as soldiers shuffled through the line, slamming trays, laughing too loud, their boots echoing on the steel floor. The smell of burned coffee and powdered eggs clung to everything. It was a base at sea, floating somewhere cold, restless, and gray, and in that restless noise she entered quietly, carrying only a cup of tea and the kind of silence that didn't need to be announced. She wore the plain gray of a new transfer, her insignia not yet displayed, her hair tucked neatly under her cap. No one noticed her at first. That was fine with her. She hadn't come to be noticed. Not yet. At a corner table sat Private Kellen Hart, young, arrogant, and bored. His laughter filled the air as he mocked another soldier's new haircut. To him, every day was a game. Every superior officer a joke, every rule something to bend. He had no idea that this morning would mark the end of his reckless comfort. His hand wrapped around a mug of hot milk, steam curling into his smirking face. His friends egged him on as he spotted the quiet woman taking a seat by herself at the far table, setting her tea down and opening a small book. He didn't know her. He didn't care to. All he saw was a target, someone soft, someone new, someone to humiliate for a laugh. He whispered something to his friends and their laughter spread like an infection. With an exaggerated stretch he rose, sauntering across the mess hall pretending to refill his mug. His boots clacked sharply as he approached her table. She didn't look up. That irritated him. He wanted her to flinch. He wanted her to know he was there. He passed right behind her, paused for a heartbeat, then tilted the mug just enough for the steaming milk to spill over her shoulder and down her back. The hiss of heat-meeting fabric filled the space. Her body stiffened for a moment, only that. No shout, no curse, no flailing arms. The room went silent, laughter cut off by shock. Kellen chuckled awkwardly, trying to keep the act alive, but something in the air shifted. She rose slowly, every movement measured, her posture impossibly straight. The milk stained the back of her gray uniform, dripping onto the floor. Her gaze lifted to meet his. For the first time in his short career, Kellen felt something unfamiliar, fear that didn't come from punishment but from the quiet certainty in her eyes. He tried to speak, to joke, to shrug it off, but his throat was dry. Without raising her voice, she called across the room for the duty officer. The man hurried over, pale and confused. She asked for his name, his rank, his commanding officer. The officer hesitated, stumbling over words. Then she turned, reached into her jacket and produced a folded set of documents, stamped and sealed. When the officer read the name at the top, his face drained of color. Admiral Evelyn Shaw, newly appointed commanding officer of the entire North Sea Fleet. The mess hall erupted into a mess of salutes. Chairs scraping, men standing rigid and terrified. Only Kellen stood frozen, his mug still half raised, eyes wide. The woman he'd mocked, the one he'd burned for amusement, was not just his superior. She outranked every soul aboard. She didn't yell. She didn't demand apology. Instead, she instructed the officer to have Kellen report to the deck in 10 minutes in full uniform. Her tone was calm, almost gentle. Then she left, her footsteps leaving quiet behind her. Outside, the wind howled over steel. The sea stretched gray and endless, waves breaking against the ship's hull. When Kellen arrived, the entire deck crew was assembled. He marched out, his stomach twisting, trying to make sense of the nightmare unfolding. The Admiral stood at the front, her cap in her hand, her eyes on the horizon. She turned when he stopped before her. No anger burned in her gaze, only disappointment and something sharper, colder. She asked him if he understood what respect meant. He stammered something about orders, about discipline, about jokes gone too far. She let him speak until his excuses tangled into silence. Then she stepped forward, so close that the wind caught her hair and tossed it between them. She told him that the uniform he wore was not a costume, that it had been earned through the sacrifice of men and women who would never see home again. That leadership was not about fear or cruelty, but about restraint, that a soldier who mocks the weak in safety will crumble in the storm of war. Her words weren't loud, but they struck like steel. Then she handed him a mop. The crew watched, silent, as the Admiral ordered Kellen to clean the entire deck, every inch, before sunset. Not as punishment, she said, but as reflection. He was to scrub until his arrogance peeled away, until he understood the weight of the respect he had thrown aside so carelessly. For hours he worked under the gray sky, the wind biting at his hands, salt stinging his skin. The Admiral stood nearby, speaking with officers inspecting the ship, her back to him but her presence heavy in the air. Each time he looked up, he saw her calm steadiness and felt a shame he couldn't name. By dusk, his uniform was soaked, his arms trembling, but the deck shone under the fading light. When he reported completion, she approached once more. She looked at his hands, raw and red, then asked him what he had learned. He didn't answer right away. For the first time, he bowed his head not to authority, but to understanding. He said he had learned that respect isn't earned by rank or fear, but by how one carries the weight of power. She nodded once, then dismissed him quietly. But that night, as he lay in his bunk, he couldn't sleep. The image of her steady eyes haunted him. He realized he had seen something rare, control in its truest form. Not rage, not vengeance, but strength tempered by grace. The next morning, he was up before dawn, standing in the cold as the sun began to edge over the horizon. When the Admiral walked the deck, he saluted her sharply, his posture perfect. She gave a small nod in return. That single acknowledgement felt heavier than any medal he could have earned. Days passed. The fleet prepared for inspection, and word of the mess hall incident spread through every level of command. Some expected the Admiral to transfer Kellen immediately, to end his career quietly. Instead, she kept him close, assigned him to logistics, made him organize operations, forced him to confront every layer of the discipline he had mocked. At first, he resented it. But as weeks turned into months, he saw her leadership in every corner of the ship. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried. She never punished to humiliate, never rewarded to be adored. She led with a steadiness that reminded the crew of what they fought for. Not orders, not pay, but purpose. One stormy night, while the sea raged and the ship groaned under the weight of crashing waves, an alarm tore through the decks. A mechanical fire had broken out in the lower bay. Men scrambled through smoke and heat. Kellen was among the first to arrive. The fire roared and panic spread like sparks. Then through the smoke came her voice, clear and calm, directing movements, giving orders, never once raising it in fear. They fought through the chaos, sealing off compartments, carrying out the wounded. The Admiral herself stepped into the smoke, helping drag a fallen engineer to safety. When they finally contained the blaze, the ship reeked of burning metal and seawater. The crew gathered in the aftermath, exhausted, their faces blackened with soot. She stood among them, her uniform scorched, her eyes steady. That night, Kellen understood everything. The same calm she had shown when he spilled the milk was the calm that saved them all. The same restraint that had shamed him was the strength that kept the crew alive. Weeks later, during the fleet assembly, Admiral Shaw stood before hundreds of officers. Her promotion was formally recognized, and she addressed the gathered ranks. Kellen stood among them, watching her speak about unity, respect, and the silent strength of discipline. Every word struck with the precision of a blade honed by years of service. After the ceremony, she passed through the ranks, nodding to each man and woman. When she reached Kellen, she paused. No words were needed. Her eyes met his, and in that moment he knew forgiveness had been granted, not in pity, but in trust. Years later, when Kellen himself became an officer, he carried her lessons in everything he did. He never shouted at subordinates, never mocked mistakes, never let arrogance cloud his duty. And sometimes, when young soldiers laughed too loud or played cruel jokes, he would stop them with just a look, the same look that once froze him in place. Far away, in her quiet office overlooking the sea, Admiral Shaw would read his reports and smile faintly. She had turned a careless boy into a man of discipline, and in doing so, had restored something vital to the fleet. The sea outside her window shimmered under pale sunlight, and she thought back to that morning, the spilled milk, the silence, the moment everything had changed. Power, she knew, was not about revenge. It was about control. The strongest leaders didn't shout. They didn't break others to prove strength. They stood quietly and let their integrity do the speaking. And somewhere out on the open ocean, a soldier once foolish enough to mock a stranger now carried her example in every order he gave, every life he led. The lesson burned deeper than any punishment could have. The memory of hot milk, a single careless act, had forged in him a respect that would last a lifetime.